Alright, hello, my name is Tony Blomqvist and this is my third video in our programming course C++ Object-Oriented Programming. This week we are going to cover inheritance. We are going to create classes, base classes or parent classes, whichever you want to call them, and use subclasses based on the values that they have. And without further introduction, let's just get to the point of this. So, game object is the base class which holds values that I believe all the other objects, meaning player and enemy in this case, could use. For example, here is the hit points, which of course in a fighting game both the enemies and the player should have, as well as attack, which is attack success rate, which is used by the attack function that all objects have as well, and a name. I also included gender, race, and class, which means that well, it's obvious that the player will have these attributes, but this decision means that also all the enemy objects will have these attributes and would need to be filled out. I think it worked fine, but there might be a chance that we want to move the gender, race, and class options to the player object instead. Alright, so game object has its own constructor with default values, as well as letting the derived classes and other pretty much any part of the code to create its own game object. Also the structure. Alright, so we have member functions attack and is alive. Is alive is meant to check if the unit still actually has some hit points left. And of course then the usual accessors. If we look at the coding side of things, we have the default constructors that at the very least initialize the default HP and attack rate values. And then of course here's the constructor where the user can input all the values that he wants to use. And here is the attack object. It basically takes another game object and attempts to attack it, reducing its HP if the attack goes through. And here we have our simple isAlive check, which just checks if the game object's hit points are still over 0. And your usual accessors and mutators. Right, so as a result of doing this game object class, we made player a derived class, and it has far fewer variables on its own now. It only has age, experience, and level. This means that, well, in this case, the enemy objects don't have those. I decided to make these variables exclusive to the player class. And this is nothing new from last week. We just have the basic constructors. We now print the value from the game object itself and not the player object. And we even here we use the setters provided by the game object class to assign these values that are really game objects. Okay. And then besides player class, we also have an enemy class, and this is a really simple class because for this week we didn't need to have any complex enemy patterns. We really just have our constructor and destructor and the default name user, which just works. Right. Besides that, I created here a pointer to an enemy object, and our game loop has been redone to accommodate for the action that we were going to implement this time. Basically what will happen is that after asking the player once to get some input, and assuming that the input isn't that the user wants to close the game, we will we will create a new enemy object here, assuming that there isn't one already, and we get an announcement that the enemy appears. And here the enemy attacks the player. This will also happen even if the enemy didn't just get initialized. The enemy will attack the player, and this means that the action defined in game object here takes place. And we then check if the attack was, well, if the player is simply dead. Everything else is handled by the game object code that applies to both player and enemy objects. And if the player happens to not be alive, there's an congratulatory message, and the game is closed. But assuming that the player doesn't die, in the next loop you have a chance to attack, assuming, well, there's always a chance to attack. If there is no enemy around, there's just this vanity text. But if there is an enemy, you basically attack at the enemy, and once again we have to check if the enemy is actually dead. And if so, you have completed the game, congratulations, well done. And that's about it for this exciting week. Yeah, thank you.